Hey there folks, the number one McKinley Dixon fan from the Infinite Jukebox here with another album review, and today I want to talk about the sorta new McKinley Dixon record, Magic Alive. With so many listeners of underground hip-hop having almost excessively high standards for virtually every aspect of an artist's work, it isn't that common to see a rapper ascend to the top of so many people's most underrated rappers active today lists in only a couple of years' time. But that's because McKinley Dixon has been working hard within the industry for a number of years at this point. And with 2021's For My Mama and Anyone Who Looked Like Her, McKinley Dixon began to cultivate a larger audience than he arguably had ever before experienced. And for a less distinct and memorable, unique MC, that probably would have likely been the end of the story behind Dixon's hype. However, with 2023 came Beloved Paradise Jazz, a record that immediately made a giant crater in the world of jazz rap and one of my personal favorite rap albums of the past couple of years. But more significantly, in that moment, Dixon solidified himself as one of the most unique and original voices in rap today, across the board, across all subgenres and forms of popularity. And now here we are with the follow-up to that record, Magic Alive, which manages to recapture that exact titular magic while ensuring that it differentiates itself from its predecessor enough so that it may also feel like equally essential listening for anyone who's even remotely interested in rap at large. As he has proven numerous times at this point, McKinley Dixon is one of the most gifted lyricists in rap today, and Magic Alive does follow the very highly conceptual and often deeply literate nature of his past works by exploring here on this record a story of three young kids who end up losing their best friend in what is implied to be some sort of tragic event of one way or another. And the rest of the album spends time exploring some of the themes that you of course would expect with a story like that. Themes of grief, themes of learning how to move on, especially at such a tender and emotionally vulnerable age. But when the record really becomes something wholly unique outside of its initial concept is in how it touches on the idea of connecting with those no longer with us once again in the afterlife. Magic Alive explores this idea in both literal and abstract ways, as much of the record sees Dixon talk about the topic of magic and what that word really means in the context of something more emotionally striking, something that really just touches your soul on a personal level, how magic applies itself as a term to the natural world, how it applies itself as a concept to the metaphysical world. And the record handles the admittedly sensitive topics here at hand with an extreme sense of vulnerability and sensitivity that is hard to deny. Despite being a narrative experience by definition, Magic Alive does feel as though it is coming directly from the deepest and darkest at times corners of McKinley Dixon's soul, which is something that you can really say about the vast majority of his discography up to this point. The man's work is nothing if it isn't honest. And it sees him ask a lot of pretty noteworthy and poignant questions. Do we sort of silently speak to those faithfully departed every time that we find something or someone to love in this universe? Can our voices be heard by those in heaven? And what is the key to understanding any sort of potential existence or reality beyond our own, or maybe even the lack thereof? And these are all questions asked both directly and indirectly by Dixon throughout the record, both as himself and through the lens of these characters. And he never gets a concrete answer to any of these inquiries that he poses. But it is in this way, though, that Magic Alive becomes the extremely earnest and thoughtful project that it is. I mean, Dixon tells a heartfelt story while asking things that, frankly, he knows that he nor anyone else will ever get the answer to or get to the bottom of in a single piece of art, in a single album, even in a single lifetime. And rather than just give up or choose to not ask those questions, he wears a poet's heart on his sleeve and comes across as nothing short of philosophical and genuine throughout every second of Magic Alive. It's a powerful listening experience on a lyrical level alone. Plenty of the very memorable and positive qualities of Beloved Paradise Jazz, again a record that I personally adored, are still relevant, still true, still applicable here on Magic Alive. Dixon remains a brilliant harebrained storyteller who can talk about slice of life moments 1 second and then only a few lines later talk about more serious topics like systematic racism and the suffering of Black Americans in the current era of US history equally well, and it just ends up making him one of the most dynamic songwriters that music in general has right now. And with that in mind, features come in bulk throughout Magic Alive and can be found on nearly every song on the track list. And that is something that may initially kind of put a few people off, especially those who aren't familiarized with how well plenty of features have worked on previous Dixon projects, particularly, again, beloved Paradise Jazz, because such a conceptual project may not seem to lend itself to the constant presence of other artistic voices, at least upon first glance. But the truth is that the features, especially because of how notable they are in terms of their just general presence from one song to the next throughout this album, make it the diverse and sonically unceasingly exciting listening experience that it ultimately really is. Fellow underground and experimental rap favorites like Gaius Guevara and Quell Chris show up here, put down some great verses, while Teller Banks drops several strong verses across a couple of songs here. Even Ice Cold Bishop's uniquely high-pitched voice and flow work shockingly well when removed from his usual West Coast trap-influenced sound and put into something more soul kind of oriented, like All the Loved Ones, which is one of the best tracks on this album, though really every song here could be a highlight depending on what mood you're in or what kind of person you are. It really doesn't have a particular must-hear track. This is just a must-hear album in general, and the features really do lend themselves to the quality of this record being so consistent. I would say that the best feature on Magic Alive, though, and I really do love every feature on here, but the best, pretty uncontestably, to me at least, is the brief appearance that comes from the legendary rapper Blue on the album closer track, Could Have Been Different. One of, again, my favorite songs in the album, but that's not really saying much when I could say that about just about every track here. The minute that Blue appears, the record just creates this amazing, climactic, emotional moment that really fits into the narrative that's being built by Dixon. After he mentions looking up to a poster and seeking guidance, Blue takes up the role as a sort of wise sage and provides a short and sweet but brilliant verse that references several of Dixon's previous projects. Blue ends off the verse by telling Dixon, "You don't gotta be me." And it's this brief moment that's a perfect way to close out the album for what feels like countless reasons. First and foremost is the fact that it is a true moment of mutual respect between two of the definitive rappers of the genre's modern underground and a true veteran of the genre. I mean, McKinley Dixon, one of the most unique and undeniably innovative voices in underground rap today, and Blue, one of the true veterans and most consistent alternative/underground rappers of all time being together. It's something touching that is really just emotionally striking. It feels like enough to already make this brief interaction one of the best moments of Dixon's entire discography so far, and that's, again, saying a lot considering how many highlights there are across the very small number of projects that Dixon has put out in the course of his career so far, considering, how young he is. But more than that, though, is how this moment represents perhaps the biggest statement of McKinley Dixon's entire body of work: to live as yourself because you can't be anyone else. You can't be those you love, nor those you hate, nor those that you simply admire from a distance. You just have to be you because you aren't capable of being anything else. One of Dixon's heroes rises from a poster and gently brushes off the admiration before giving positive affirmations about Dixon's own creative voice. It's this blink and you miss it kind of moment in the larger context of the album, but it's a perfect way for McKinley Dixon to continue his work's overarching theme of carrying on the torch of family members, of loved ones, and idols, while also recognizing his own unique spirit and encouraging the audience to do the same. This moment where one of his heroes comes out of nothingness to tell him to be him, to take that inspiration and to go forth while developing his own sound, his own voice, and making sure to prioritize himself and his own uniqueness before anything else, because at the end of the day, that's the best way he can honor those that he wishes to pay respects towards. It's such a moving, brilliant moment, and it just ends out the album so perfectly in ways that I can't even begin to describe. The live jazz instrumentation from Dixon's previous work, unsurprisingly, continues to be a major point of focus on Magic Alive as well, and considering this has been one of the biggest ways in which Dixon has made himself sonically stand out from the crowd, so to speak, throughout his still young career, it feels impossible to even think about complaining about such an essential part of his sound remaining relevant here. I'm not going to bitch about that in any capacity. The percussion here especially stands out between some spacious, clean production that is absolutely gorgeous from one track to the next, to the way that the drums directly interact with the performers that are rapping over them. Upon repeated listens, it becomes apparent to the listener that the drums act somewhat like a secondary MC that frequently acts freely from the rest of the performers on the album, and often lifts them up in particularly emotional passages. Take, for example, the track FFOL, where the drums cut out and give Dixon space in the mix to deliver an undeniably in-the-pocket, intense flow before the hi-hats begin to sort of accentuate every other syllable that he delivers and then swing back into the original instrumentation. It gives this moment of just pure tension for the listener, and it builds back up into something beautiful that manages to revisit the same style sonically that the rest of the song delivers auditorily up to that point, while also kind of feeling different emotionally, like a moment of just pure relief, just pure expression in the most beautiful way possible. And in various moments, there is also the incorporation of brass sections that add texture and subtle hooks alongside really tight, punchy bass lines. And at the end of the day, what you're left with is the impressive jazz leanings of Magic Alive, a record that maybe masters those jazz rap influences more than any Dixon project has thus far. The entire thing is sort of subtly experimental as well, with plenty of nuanced moments throughout Magic Alive feeling outright abrasive in places, which is something very unique in the larger context of Dixon's discography, of course. Perhaps the most direct example of this coming in the form of the beat switch on Recitatif, a song that takes its name from the Toni Morrison short story, kind of similar to the title of Beloved Paradise Jazz, which did the same thing. And that brings the song from a great musically mellow track focusing on Dixon to a nearly industrial cut with an amazing verse from Teller Banks, who I mentioned before, as there's a focus being put on emotional turmoil and oppression resulting in a product of violence, as Banks's verse arguably acts as a sort of vague kind of revenge tale, which ends up being a pretty powerful statement in a record that is in many ways kind of hopeful in a lot of cases, despite recognizing a lot of struggle as well. And elsewhere, the title track delivers this really hot, funky bass line alongside a chorus with frequent voice cracks that feel more tonally energetic than much of the record that precedes it, and adds a jolt of energy to the listening experience in a way that feels off-kilter even by Dixon's established standards of going in slightly minor avant-garde kind of directions now and again. It's really interesting to see him continue to really push the envelope and continue to develop himself as an artist in ways that I don't think really anyone could possibly predict. Just so many different directions being gone in at one time while sticking to this core jazz rap live in the studio kind of sound, and it ends up being just as chaotic as it is beautiful. Magic Alive feels especially boundary pushing on a lyrical front as Dixon explores some of the darkest yet most inspiring lines of his body of work to date. For example, Run 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 Part 2, a sequel that follows up Part 1 from his previous studio album, features the lyrics, "Now he stands up on the phone wire, what a balancing beam. I watch him from the rooftop and he sees the house lean, but at least hell's grass really got a certain green," as it takes on this notion of wanting to live dangerously for the sake of dying gloriously, as if that's the only respectable way to go out. The only way to die that isn't pathetic is to live so chaotically and in such a dangerous manner that you'll die in an equally chaotic and explosive way as a sort of way to be remembered. It's an incredibly dark song, yet it does a great job at earnestly exploring that concept. while another song like Listen Gentle features the beautiful lines, "I found the answer to be so damn contrived, I'd kill myself to bring you back. How's that magic alive?" as it bluntly discusses the helpless yet desperate sensation of wanting to bring someone back from the afterlife. It's a tone and a feeling and a theme that many, if not almost every person on the planet can relate to. And in that sense, it really does just really strike your heart deeply. It's a very emotive couplet, but at the same time, it is worded in such a poetic, beautiful, unique way in the overall narrative and just in general, structurally speaking, that it feels like McKinley Dixon wording it in a way that feels universal, yet at the same time could only be spoken by him in particular. And that's what makes his songwriting on this record so fascinating to me. It's a record that deals with a lot of topics that surely have affected almost every single human being above the age of like 8 on the planet at one point or another, but at the same time, the way that he says and words everything, the way he crafts this beautiful, somewhat abstract narrative while earnestly exploring some of these more philosophical concepts, it's uniquely his. It could not be made by any other artist, and frankly, I don't even think it could be made by McKinley Dixon a second time. It's a singular work of art, and it truly is one of the most definitive jazz rap albums of the past many years, quite frankly, because Magic Alive does undeniably carry on the torch of some of the best qualities of its predecessor, but it could certainly be argued, and it's me, I'm the one who's arguing, that this is the most experimental McKinley Dixon album to date from a musical and lyrical standpoint alike. Even by McKinley Dixon standards, Magic Alive is a dense listening experience. Despite barely cracking a 35-minute runtime, there is an unbelievable amount of absolutely gorgeous poetry, social commentary, and self-awareness to be found throughout this record, and comprehending the lush majesty of the jazz-focused instrumentation or the numerous outstanding features from both Dixon's peers and influences alike alone warrants endless listens, an infinite amount of attention from the audience. And with that being said, this is the kind of record that deserves to ask that time of you, the kind of record that has earned the ability to ask the listener to give it that many listens, dozens upon dozens of revisits to this one single project just to understand Dixon's mindset going into it a little bit better. And at the end of the day, it's a record that weaves a heartbreaking yet beautiful, and for some of the less fortunate among us, relatable narrative. And Dixon poses questions on how to find self-love, carry on the stories and the legacies of ancestors and loved ones, and above all else, as the title implies, what magic truly is. If magic is maybe in everything and everyone, every moment around us. And while the final answers to those questions may be left to interpretation to the listener, maybe even to Dixon himself, there is one thing to be certain about in relation to the topic of magic, which is that magic is alive, and it is woven into every last note of McKinley Dixon's work here. I'm going to give this record 4.5 stars out of 5. With that being said, that's the end of this album review. Thank you for watching The Infinite Jukebox, and I'll see you in the next one.